House Speaker Michael Madigan's millionaire tax is back from the dead. Cook County Board President Toni Preckwinkle lobbies for county pension reform, and the Illinois Senate ratifies a constitutional amendment 30 years after its original deadline. Here to discuss all that and more is Chicago Sun-Times Springfield Bureau Chief Dave McKinney. Dave, thank you for joining us. And first of all, rumblings of an alternative budget that Speaker Madigan is going to propose. What's going on?
Well, Phil, I think what we're looking for Friday is an up or down vote on what essentially is being called a doomsday budget here. This is a budget that's being drafted in response to the fact that Madigan, when he surveyed his own caucus, he only had 34 House Democrats willing to support an income tax extension. So what we're going to see tomorrow, very likely, is a bill that cuts education by $500-some million, human services by $300 or $400 million. And it's going to be a pretty bitter pill for a lot of these House Democrats to swallow going into the long Memorial Day weekend when, no doubt they're going to come into contact with a lot of constituents who rely upon those services.
And yet some Democrats are candidly calling this a, quote, pretend budget.
Yeah, because I think that there's a recognition that there's not going to be support to pass this either. I mean, even if the Republicans were to sign on and vote for a more austere budget like this, and there's no indication yet what they're going to do, I don't think the votes are going to exist within that House Democratic caucus to support this either.
Speaker Madigan has also resurrected his so-called millionaire's tax. What's he doing?
Well, he was in committee this morning and moved a bill out that would, establish yet another advisory referendum for the November 4th ballot. And this would ask voters whether or not they favor imposing a 3% surcharge on millionaires. And it would raise about $1 billion that would go to elementary and secondary education. And, it's primarily seen, I think, as a tool to drive voter turnout. And if you remember, I mean, the fall ballot is starting to get really crowded. If this passes, we might see this paired up with another advisory referendum on hiking the minimum wage. Plus, there are two constitutional amendments that are going to be on the ballot. One of them, deals with victims' rights, and the other one is a bill that deals with. I'm blanking on the issue now, but
Okay.
We've got two other constitutional amendments on the ballot here, and so it's going to be a crowded ballot.
Back to the point you just made, though, about how it might be a move to generate voter turnout. Expand on that.
Well, I mean, it's, when you're talking about throwing more money into schools, naturally that's an issue that appeals to a lot of the teachers' unions who are, they line democratically. I think that, school, especially in Chicago, when you think about the turmoil that has happened with all the school closures, the thought of more money coming into schools might drive some parents to the polls. So, we're seeing that with the minimum wage that drives low-income workers to the polls potentially. This ERA thing that passed today that we'll talk about here probably in a minute or two is another issue that could drive women to the polls. So it's a very concerted effort by Democrats, I think, to get their people to the polls.
Since you mentioned it, why is it that the state Senate is ratifying the ERA, so many years after its original deadline? What's going on?
Well, I mean, this passed out of the Senate today by, I think, 38 or 39 votes. It needed a supermajority to pass, and now it's headed to the House. And it basically picks up this long dormant issue that, was the subject of one of the most epic state house battles in recent memory. It was back in the early 80s. George Ryan was the House Speaker at that point, and he put the kibosh on it. And we had, feminists from across the country converging in the Capitol back then. And in anger, they were writing George Ryan's name in pig's blood on the floor of the Capitol. I mean, it was dramatic. What we're seeing now is just basically an effort to try to jumpstart this nationally. And as I said, I think it's an effort also to drive women to the polls for the governor's race and for some of the legislative races here in Illinois.
Because the amendment is 3 states shy of ratification. Okay, so let's move back to another topic, and that is Cook County Board President Toni Preckwinkle was in Springfield lobbying for Cook County pension reform. What kind of reception did she get?
Well, she got a favorable reception, Phil. She met with Senate President John Cullerton, and she met with House Speaker Michael Madigan for a bit of time today, and Madigan emerged afterwards and said he thought that her bill would pass. We've not seen details yet of it. We expect that it'll surface probably in a Senate committee on Tuesday. What we do know is that under the plan that I believe in December of 2015, the county has a $145 million commitment that they have to make to fund this pension plan that they're talking about. And from what I'm being told, it's a plan that's not going to rely upon property taxes and very well could rely on new windfall created by Obamacare.
Dave McKinney, thanks so much for the update. We'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil.